Breaking tonight, a stunning defeat on primary night as one of the most powerful Republicans on Capitol Hill goes down. I'm Megyn Kelly with special coverage. Welcome, everyone. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor losing his Virginia primary against Tea Party-backed Dave Brat, a political novice with little money who would cast Majority Leader Cantor as a Washington insider who is not conservative enough. Joining me now, Bret Baier, anchor of Special Report, Chris Stirewalt, our Fox News digital politics editor, and Brit Hume, senior political analyst and campaign Carl Cameron is here as well. Wow, how about that lineup? Look at those guys. Now, there's four handsome gentlemen right there, ready to take us through this. Let me start with you, Brit, because we haven't heard from you yet on this. So I want to get your take on the hugeness of this loss for Eric Cantor.
Well, what's big? First of all, the margin is amazing. I mean, we're looking at now, with not everything fully counted, in excess of 10 percentage points. This from a guy who had practically no money. He was way, way overspent, as has been pointed out, by someone way better known who had not been thought to be in any serious political trouble. The conventional wisdom, Megyn, on this has already begun to form, and it goes this way, that this is bad news long-term for the Republicans and great news for Democrats. And here's why. Because it is argued by some that immigration reform will now never pass, with Republicans who will be, very much chastened by what happened to Eric Cantor. So that's dead for now, and that means that Republicans will have to proceed into the 2016 election without their name associated with immigration reform, which will make it very difficult for any Republican to be elected president. Now, I'm not sure I buy that, but that is how this is being read tonight. And in this town, when something like this happens, Megyn, the conventional wisdom forms very quickly.
It seems hard to deny that this is about immigration, however, Britt. Is there any other out? I know that Dave Brat was big on, limited government funding, but what spending? What else could it be?
When you look around for a proximate cause for an earthquake like this, that's about all you can see. This issue had been very much in the news in recent days. It had come to the forefront again. Cantor was known to be working to try to achieve some kind of compromise immigration reform bill, which he fervently denied was amnesty. And if you look up the meaning of the word amnesty, he had a point. But there it is. And among conservative Republicans, immigration reform of almost any kind that would be acceptable to Democrats is a no-no. And he's associated with that. And that's the only thing we can look at tonight that will tell the tale. Now, Virginia primaries like this are open to all voters. It'll be interesting to find out, as we eventually will, whether there were a lot of Democrats who came and voted in this primary to try to knock Cantor off. We don't know that tonight. It's impossible to say at this point. But we're going to be picking through the evidence on this one for some time. We need a team of CSIs, perhaps, to help us.
You're in good stead tonight. I mean, I think we can start with you four. Bret, let me take it to you from the former host of Special Report to the current host of Special Report. Already the Democrats seem to be trying to capitalize on this. We just got this alert saying this is all about the Tea Party. The Republican establishment has been so giddy so far, saying that they have beaten back the Tea Party and that they're choosing more sort of mainstream Republican candidates. And aha, no, they aren't.
Yeah, you know who's giddy? Democrats. They put giddy in that press release because, listen, they had looked around the country at these races where so-called mainstream Republicans were managing to push back a lot of these really conservative challenges that Democrats feel that they can run a better race against in the fall. And they were seeing this, and then they changed their rhetoric, saying, you know what, the Republican Party overall has absorbed all of the Tea Party talking points, and they're now more conservative, and so essentially they're the Tea Party. Now you hear the different release, and that essentially is that the Tea Party has risen again. And frankly, it has. In Virginia, to take out the House Majority Leader in a race that no one predicted this would happen. In fact, Cantor's people up on the Hill just this week, Megyn, were telling people they didn't expect any issues. They were up 55 to 39. It was a little closer than they wanted to be, but they didn't expect any issues. When the votes started coming in tonight, it was remarkable to see the outpouring of people saying, holy cow, this is really going to make a big splash.
They got issues. There's some issues. Let me ask Stirewalt. Chris Stirewalt is with us as well. Chris, all right. So now it looks like Dave Brat is going to go forward. What are Cantor's options? Can he do a write-in thing like we saw with Lisa Murkowski? Remember that? Can he still get on the ballot in any way? Is this now Dave Brat's for the taking? And is he likely to win?
Well, sour grapes are unpopular in most districts. Lisa Murkowski had a very unusual case up in Alaska. Joe Miller was a very unusual Republican nominee. She had a famous name. Eric Cantor, this is one House district. I tend to think, and I may be proven wrong, I tend to think this is pretty safe Republican territory, especially given the fact that the Democratic side didn't put together much of an offering. As we now know, both of the candidates, major party candidates in this race, are professors at the same college. How about that? They're both professors at Randolph-Macon College. We are not talking about any high wattage, big dollar campaigns here. And given the partisan lean of the district, I would tend to think that Brat will go on to win. And the other thing I'd say is the message for Republicans is Eric Cantor made a fateful decision, which was he was going to go to war with the Tea Party. He wasn't going to do what Lindsey Graham did and try and make peace with the Tea Party. He was going to go to war with the Tea Party, and he was going to beat it. And he ran negative ads, and he went to a meeting with a bunch of guys down, and he took a spring break meeting with a bunch of guys down on the seacoast to say, you know what, we can beat these guys, and we need to band together, raise money, and defeat the Tea Party. Well, it turned out that the Tea Party beat him, and there's a lesson in that, too.
All right, and we're just getting word now that Eric Cantor is about to make remarks, and we're going to take those just as soon as we get them. We're going to take those, and we'll tell you what Eric Cantor is saying. You'll be able to hear it for yourself. Hello. Carl Cameron, let me ask you. Obviously, this was a stunning defeat. I guess it's also going to be a story about polling, since nobody thought that this was a possibility tonight.
Well, we could talk about polling, and we can talk about that, but let's also talk about turnout. If you look at those numbers on the screen there, you'll see that the sum total of the votes here was just a little bit over, what, 63,000 votes or something like that? That's pretty small when you consider that a congressional district is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 600,000 people. And the margin of error is 7,000 votes. That's a margin of error in an aldermanic or a city council meeting in some of the big cities in America. So it was pretty close. It was pretty small. That small a margin means the people with the most ardent supporters come out. And one of the things that Mr. Brat was able to do, because he couldn't afford to run a lot of ads, was he went to the conservative opinion makers. He had folks like Laura Ingraham, radio hosts, out and endorsing him and talking on the air a lot. He couldn't possibly have afforded the amount of free airtime he got on talk radio that Eric Cantor was trying to buy with paid ads. So that's a big deal. It was a low turnout race. It's worth noting that the weather was foul here yesterday, and it rained a couple of times today as well. So some of it might have been nature helping out David Brat. As for what happens to Mr. Cantor and the Republicans, well, who knows? At least the rain did, or maybe it helped. But again, it's a very, very low turnout here. And when it's a low turnout race, that often tends to favor the insurgent, someone trying to create the change and oust the incumbent. That's very much what appears to have happened here.
The other thing, though, this is for Brett Baer, the other thing is what's been in the news this week. Just this week alone, about this massive influx of illegal immigrant children along our southern border, reports of near collapse of the Border Patrol, overwhelmed, DHS not knowing what to do with them, these leaked reports and photos of the children stocked in these, it looks like cages because we're not capable of handling them. And this, as a political matter, timed so unfortunately for Eric Cantor, given his position on these children.
Sure, and you know what, Megan? He was trying to play all sides, and he ended up playing no sides. He was trying to make points with the folks who were pushing immigration reform, while he was trying to make points with the folks opposed to it. Dave Brat did a masterful job with about $200,000 in the bank, compared to some $2.5 million for Eric Cantor, going after radio talk show hosts, as Carl mentioned, Laura Ingraham, Glenn Beck, and getting them on his side on this particular issue that, as you point out, is in the news. I want to add that what I was saying before about Democrats kind of playing out here in this first release from the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz saying this: tonight's result in Virginia settles the debate once and for all. The Tea Party has taken control of the Republican Party. period. When Eric Cantor, who time and again has blocked common sense legislation to grow the middle class, can't earn the Republican nomination, it's clear the GOP has redefined far right. Democrats, on the other hand, have nominated a mainstream candidate who will proudly represent this district, and I look forward to his victory in November. So originally it was that the mainstream Republicans had taken over the Tea Party. Now the Tea Party has risen again, and the Republican Party is in trouble because of it. That's how Democrats will play it, and that's how a lot of states will factor it in.
But what's the truth, Chris Stirewalt? Because you and I have been talking on the Kelly File about the fact that these Tea Partiers have been losing to these mainstream Republican parties. And we talked about how the Democrats seem to have, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, a talking point generated just a couple of weeks ago that the Tea Party has taken over the Republican Party, that they're no longer two distinct groups. They're one and the same, and the Tea Party has won. And you and I talked about the last primary night about how that just wasn't being borne out that particular night. Does this shift that? Does this change that?
Well, you know, they got to send out something. They can't send out nothing, so they have to send out something. So they say it's the Tea Party, it's the establishment, the Tea Party lost, the Tea Party won. It goes back and forth. In the end, that doesn't really matter. What matters is whether Republicans are nominating electable candidates. The Republican Party's future is dependent on whether they nominate electable candidates.
Is this one? Is Dave Brat one?
I think Dave Brat so far seems to be an electable candidate. He is, again, as you say, no dough, college economics professor, and a guy who ran a very grassroots campaign. But he is an attractive candidate. He did speak directly to people. He did have a very clear, very forthright message. He doesn't seem to have a bunch of baggage, and he seems to be safe in this district. And I think the other thing is that for Eric Cantor, going negative, trying to attack, trying to seek and destroy when you're in the greater position, that's not necessarily the right way to go. John Boehner faced a challenge in his race in Ohio. He dispatched the guy because he got out there, got busy, and talked to the constituents and made a more positive case to his constituents about why he ought to stay and why his clout was worth having.
Megan, let me just
yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Just add in. We were talking about a possible write-in campaign, and it is possible by the law. Eric Cantor can have a write-in campaign. There is no write-in vote shall be counted for an office of any person whose name appears on the ballot as candidate for that office is the law. He can do this write-in possibility. Also, checking whether he could possibly make an independent run here. So this is an interesting thing. You remember Lisa Murkowski did in Alaska. This would be an amazing thing if Eric Cantor comes out and says he is still fighting despite losing this primary. It is possible by the law. Whether he does it or not is another question.
And Britt, you know, we are waiting to actually hear the remarks from Eric Cantor, but we're being told that in the brief statement he made, there was nothing about write-in candidacy or continuing his fight. Your take on it?
Well, it's going to write-in candidacies are almost always long shots, and they rarely succeed. The Lisa Murkowski case, as has been pointed out, was a very unusual set of circumstances. My guess is that it's unlikely he'll try it. I was just down at Randolph-Macon College 10 days ago, Megan, to receive an honorary degree, and I made the graduation speech there. And I believe I was introduced to Dave Brat, but I was like everyone else at the time. His candidacy had made so little impact. I knew what the polls were saying. He was well behind. It didn't seem like he was a factor, but he did seem like a perfectly attractive guy. And my guess is that he will, I guess he said a couple of things perhaps that could be questioned. But I don't sense that we have some guy here whose inexperience is going to mean that he's going to blunder his way into a campaign and endanger the seat for the Republicans. He looks like somebody who, as Chris suggests, is probably a pretty respectable candidate who could win this race without too much trouble in a district that certainly favors the Republican Party. So, I think write-in is a long shot. I think the more interesting question, Megan, tonight is, as we look at this extraordinary upset, is what does this tell us about the role of the Tea Party within the Republican Party? And what it tells me is the Republican Party cannot ignore the Tea Party. It must find a way to fuse together the wings of its party to be able to have a winning season. Now, it might be able to win this fall because the odds and the arithmetic and the issues and the circumstances are so bad for the Democrats. But going farther out, the Republican Party's got to find a way to make peace with itself and make peace with both its wings. And the Tea Party remains a tremendous source of energy, as it proved tonight in electing this long shot candidate or nominating this long shot candidate.
Just when they had fallen out of the news on so many fronts, they are back in it in a major way. I'm going to get to you in 1 second, Carl, but I want to tell the viewers this: we have a brief transcription of what Eric Cantor has said, and again, when we have it, we'll play it for you. But basically, he just talks about how he wants to put forth efforts of putting forth conservative solutions. He wants to help families and the most vulnerable. He spent a lot of time on charter schools so everyone can have access to the American dream. And then he says, these are the kinds of things I know we will continue working on. There are long faces here tonight, and it's disappointing. I believe in opportunity and look forward to continuing to fight for things that we believe in and the conservative cause. It doesn't sound like a man who's going to fight on, Carl.
No, it doesn't. And, of course, he might be persuaded if he sees something else in the polls in the next couple of days, but there isn't very much of a window to do that. Right now, David Brat is the congressman-elect, and his newcomer status and his status as an academic may be cause for Democrats to really get worried. They think, ha, 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 Eric Cantor got knocked off and we got a newcomer. We could actually pick up a House seat here. Perhaps not the case. This isn't the first time that the Tea Party's champion has turned out to be an academic. We can talk about Ben Sasse out in Nebraska, who was the president of a university, an Ivy League educated, and he won that Senate nomination in a walk. David Brat could be a new face in the Republican Party. He'll bring new vigor to it. He'll bring new ideas. And because Eric Cantor ran hard to try to stop this in the last couple of days, one can assume that as an academic there may not be all that much. Perhaps there's some papers in there that he has published that could be controversial, but his stuff has already been pawed over. Democrats are going to take another look at it, but he comes to the table now with an awful lot of wind in his sails. Big, big momentum. He's David. He's knocked off the House Majority Leader. This is a very big deal. He becomes formidable immediately. What we don't know about him is perhaps an opportunity for him to define himself. Watch Democrats in the next couple of weeks try to do that negatively.
What happens now, Carl, in terms of the House Majority Leadership position?
Oh, he stays in the job. He'll be weakened in it because they'll know he's a lame duck. But the new House doesn't come in until next year, so we are looking at a situation where he's a primary candidate who's beaten, and the election for his seat will go on without him. It could be a kind of a lonely place around the Majority Leader's office because he's now yesterday's news.
This is like, Kevin Spacey losing his seat on House of Cards. It's, before he became vice president in House of Cards, it's as if he was unseated by no one.
Cantor's ability,
just for those watching at home.
Cantor's ability to herd the cats. He's not the whip, but he's certainly a leader, and he's been known to twist arms. That's going to be substantially diminished right now. It'll be interesting to see whether establishment Republicans in the House try to rally around him and keep him strong, or if they begin to look for somebody else to sort of chair the meetings.
We should point out, Megan, this is unprecedented. This is unprecedented for a House Majority Leader to lose his seat in a primary. Has never happened before. Never in the history of our republic has it happened before.
But let me ask you this, Brett. Let me ask you this. Is this a Virginia thing? Because the latest polls just showed something like 62% of the American people were in favor of immigration reform. The people down in Virginia don't seem to be so in favor of it.
No, it's a conservative immigration policy thing. And the conservatives who showed up, the 70,000 voters total for this small race in a primary on a rainy day, those people care about this issue. And they care about specifically what Eric Cantor was or was not doing behind the scenes. Maybe it didn't match up with what his public comments about immigration reform were. And Dave Brat tapped into that real concern about this issue of immigration reform. And I think Britt's right, and we've talked about it, that immigration reform, it was on the back burner for a long time. It was starting to come to the boil on the front burner. I think it's well back in the back burner now for Republicans. And what does that mean? It may mean good things for the Republican Party for the midterms in November. But what does it mean in 2016? not good things for the demographic shift of this country. That Republicans who watch these things across the country are very concerned that this issue is going to make it really hard for a Republican to win the White House in 2016. One more thing I should point out is the Chamber of Commerce actively supported House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. The Chamber of Commerce, of course, is pushing for immigration reform. The power of the Chamber of Commerce to get behind candidates around the country, I think, is going to be questioned, as Dave Brat ran specifically against the Chamber of Commerce.
You have to stand by, because I get to say something now that I have never, dare I say, no anchor has ever said in the history of anchoring television, which is Bret Baier, Chris Stirewalt, Britt Hume, Carl Cameron, stand by, because I want to go to a phoner with Ann Coulter. And thank you so much for joining us by phone. And the reason we wanted to talk to you is because you, Laura Ingraham, and many others were instrumental, perhaps, in making in causing this event tonight. You were very much against Eric Cantor in this race. Tell us why.
Well, like most of the country, based on polls, amnesty is very bad for the country. It's bad for Americans. It's good for big employers and Chamber of Commerce. But, I mean, needless to say, I've been glued to Fox since this news broke. I was trying to go to the grocery store and haven't been able to leave. And Carl Cameron was saying earlier, well, it's only 3,000 voters. Well, okay, but the polls get taken all the time of a few hundred people, of a few thousand people. And every time the poll is taken, when people know that this is an issue, unfortunately they did not know that in North Carolina a few weeks ago. When they know that amnesty is on the table, amnesty loses big. The idea that this will hurt the Republicans in 2016 is insane. It has always been a winning issue. This is good for Americans, good for voters. It is bad for employers looking for cheap labor. But Republicans have got to put their foot down to the Chamber of Commerce and say, look, if we bring in 30 million, 40 million illegal aliens who are going to break for the Democrats, we're not going to be able to give you anything else. That's it, because it's going to be the end of the Republican Party in this country.
Let me ask you this, because I know what you want. I've talked to you many times about your stance on immigration. This has become so important for you, but I know what you want. But tell me what you think in terms of the effect this will have on other Republicans running their races on a go-forward basis.
I hope it will at least shut down any more happy talk about amnesty this year. I wish it would have the effect of Republicans waking up and seeing that this is a winning issue for the Republicans, and not just with the Republican base. We're talking about African Americans being hurt the most by illegal immigration, and just legal immigration, which is dumping 1.2 million low-wage workers on the country every year through the laws of supply and demand. You know, Democrats love to talk about economic inequality. This is the reason for it since 1970, and we need to care about Americans first.
What about the fact that Eric Cantor was said to be very conservative on virtually every other issue?
I think that's a wonderful point, and I'm glad you keep making it, because I've also noticed in the commentary that the Democrat response is to keep saying, oh, this is a Tea Party victory. I notice they are not saying, they seem to think that's insulting and will turn people off. They are not saying this is a defeat for amnesty, because they know what I'm saying is true. Americans do not want amnesty. In fact, they'd like a moratorium on immigration generally. Overwhelmingly, the polls have shown that for 20 years, but the Chamber of Commerce, the Sheldon Adelsons of the world keep buying their way into the heart of John Boehner and Eric Cantor. And whenever the voters know what the positions are, again, they did not know in North Carolina last month, when they know, they will vote against amnesty, not just to the Republican base, African Americans, legal Hispanics, blue-collar white workers.
Ann, thank you so much. I want to stand you by, because joining us on the phone now is Fox News contributor and conservative radio talk show host Laura Ingraham, who was instrumental here. She campaigned for Bret, she rallied for Bret, and must be very pleased with the results tonight. Your take on it, Laura?
Well, I was just celebrating my son's 6th birthday when I noticed my phone kept going off, like, 50 calls, one after the other. So I finally answered, and I just heard the stunning news. Look, I've been catching a little bit of what you all have been saying on the panel, and I want to add this. I mean, on a beautiful day a week ago, Tuesday night, 623 people showed up at Eric Cantor's own country club in Glen Ellen, Virginia. They could have been doing anything else that night. It wasn't just Tea Party folks. It was people from all different backgrounds who were just, really tired of the representation that they'd been getting. They weren't particularly, strident people. They're people who've not really done a lot in politics before, for the most part. I had a chance to chat with a lot of them. But they're really tired of the business as usual in Washington. They're tired of the establishment mindset that shoves this idea that amnesty is the only way for the Republican Party to survive. And they made a difference. And this is a massive wake-up call to the Republican Party if they choose to actually, wake up at this point. If they don't, if John Boehner and Paul Ryan and the rest of the crew and the GOP establishment moves forward after this race with this idea of, quote, immigration reform, which is a pathway to some type of amnesty eventually, they will put a wedge down the middle of the Republican Party that will, in my mind, prevent Republicans from winning in 2016, exactly the opposite of what they're contending. So this is an amazing moment for the people. It is not to be discounted as something that happened on a rainy day. These are the people who were outspent 22-1.
Just so the viewers know, Eric Cantor raised basically $5.5 million and spent just over $5 million. Dave Bratt raised $206,000 and spent $122,000 of it.
Right, and we, at the end, I think he was getting, $25 here and there. I mean, he was, he just really didn't have very much money, but what he had was a lot of heart, and he's a compassionate, kind, but I think very canny thinker for someone who's not been involved in politics. And I know people say, well, what is he going to do? He doesn't have any experience. All I can say to everybody who's saying that is, what have the experienced people done for us lately? We have 1 out of 5 people living in poverty in this country. We have 62% of the country thinking we're going in the wrong direction. We have a flatlining middle class as Mark Zuckerberg and the uber rich keep getting better. So I think there are a lot of people out there tonight saying this could be the beginning of something really big for the Republican Party, building a coalition with, I think Ann was right, with Black Americans, with Asian Americans, Latino Americans who want to see rising wages and a better life for legal immigrants and American citizens. That's what this is all about. And I think it is an absolute repudiation of establishment politics. Anyone on television tonight who tries to discount that, I think is doing a disservice to the people watching. I want
to stand you by because I have more to ask you. In particular, I want to ask you about the Democrats who seem to be happy about this and whether you think this is a win of a battle and potential loss of a war. But I can't do it yet because I've got to do a restart of the show. So stand by, Laura Ingraham. Much more with you and our panel as we bring our viewers up to speed on a seismic shift in politics tonight, one no one expected.